Kiev, the Ukraine. Alexeyev looked over the intelligence material on his desk. His boss was in Moscow for a high-level briefing. But this data should be, he corrected himself, little different from what his commander was hearing. Things are not going well in Germany? Captain Sergetov asked. No, we were supposed to have reached the outskirts of Hamburg by H+36. A day and a half, the plan called for. Instead, we're not quite there yet, and Third Shock Army has taken murderous losses from NATO aircraft. He paused, staring at the map. If I were the NATO commander, I'd counterattack again, right there. Perhaps they are unable to do so. Their first counterattack was repulsed. At the cost of a broken tank division and 60 aircraft. Victories like that we can do without. The picture in the south is scarcely better. The NATO forces are trading space for time, and doing it very well. Their ground forces and tactical aircraft are operating over the same ground they've practiced on for 30 years. Our losses are nearly double the estimates, and we can't sustain that. Alexeyev leaned back. He chided himself for being defeatist. It was mainly a manifestation of his desire to join the action. He was certain, as any general would be certain, that he could do things better. What about NATO losses? Heavy, we think. They have been remarkably profligate in their weapons expenditures. The Germans have staked too much on defending Hamburg, and it has to be costing them dearly. If I could not counterattack in their place, I would withdraw. A city is not worth breaking the balance of your army. We learned that lesson at Kiev. Excuse me, Comrade General, what about Stalingrad? A somewhat different situation, Captain. Remarkable, nonetheless, how history can repeat itself, Alexeyev muttered, studying the map on the wall. He shook his head. West Germany had too much in the way of road communications for that to work. The KGB reports that NATO has 2, at most 3 weeks' supply of munitions left. That will be the decisive factor. What of our supplies and fuel? The young captain asked. His answer was a scowl. Bitburg, Federal Republic of Germany. Colonel Ellington awoke at 6 that evening. He shaved and walked outside, the sun still high in the evening sky. He wondered what mission they'd have tonight. He was not a bitter man, but to have nearly a quarter of his crews, men with whom he had worked for 2 straight years, lost in a week, was a difficult thing to accept. It had been too long since his experience in Vietnam. He'd forgotten how terrible losses could be. His men could not stand down a day to mourn their dead and ease the pain, much as they needed to. They were being carefully rested. Standing orders gave them 8 hours of sleep a day. Like night hunters, they slept only by day. They were making a difference, however. He was sure of that. Every night the black and green frisbees lifted off for some special target or other, and the Russians still had not figured a counter. The strike cameras mounted in each aircraft were bringing back pictures that the wing intelligence officers could scarcely believe. But at such a cost. Well, the colonel reminded himself that 1 sortie a day was a lighter load than the other air crews were bearing, and that the close support crews were taking losses equal to his own. Tonight held another mission. He ordered his brain to occupy itself with that task alone. The briefings took an hour. 10 aircraft would fly tonight, 2 planes each at 5 targets. As commander, he drew the toughest. Surveillance indicated that Ivan had a previously unsuspected forward fuel dump at a position west of Wittenberg that was supporting the drive on Hamburg, and the Germans wanted it taken out. His wingman would go in with Durandals, and he'd follow with Rockeyes. There would be no supporting aircraft on this one, and the colonel didn't want jammer aircraft to go in with him. 2 of his lost birds had had such support, and the jamming had merely alerted the defenses. He examined the topographical maps closely. The land was flat. Not much in the way of mountains and hills to hide behind, but then he could skim at treetop level, and that was almost as good. He'd approach from the east, behind the target. There was a 20-knot west wind, and if he came in from leeward, the defenders would be unable to hear his approach until bomb release. Probably. They'd egress the area by heading southwest. Total mission time, 75 minutes. He computed his necessary fuel load, careful as always to allow for the drag of his bombs. To the bare-bones fuel requirements, he added 5 minutes on afterburner in case of air-to-air combat, and 10 minutes to orbit Bitburg for landing. Satisfied, he went off for breakfast. With each bite of toast, his mind ran through the mission like a movie, visualizing every event, every obstacle, every SAM site to be avoided. He randomly inserted the unexpected. A flight of low-level fighters at the target. What effect would this have on the mission? What would the target look like on this approach? If he had to make a second bombing pass, from what direction? Major Isley ate with his commander in silence, recognizing the blank look on his face and running through his own mental checklist. They headed straight into East Germany for 50 miles before turning north at Rathenow. 2 Soviet mainstay aircraft were up, a good distance back from the border, and surrounded by agile flanker interceptors. Staying well outside the effective range of their radar, the 2 aircraft flew low and in tight formation. When they screeched over main roads, it was always in a direction away from a course to their target. They avoided cities, towns, and known enemy depots where there might be SAMs. The inertial navigation systems kept track of their progress on a map display on the pilot's instrument panel. The distance to the target shrank rapidly as the aircraft curved west. They flashed over Wittenberg at 500 knots. The infrared cameras showed fueling vehicles on the roads heading right for the target area. There. At least 20 tank trucks were visible in the trees, fueling from underground tanks. Target in sight. Execute according to plan. Raj, acknowledged Shade 2. I have them visual. The Duke broke left, clearing the way for his wingman to make the first run. Shade 2's aircraft was the only one left with the proper ejector racks for the bulky hard-target munitions. God! The Duke's display showed an SA-11 launcher right in his flight path, its missiles aimed northwest. One of his aircraft had learned the hard way that the SA-11 had an infrared homing capacity that no one had suspected. The colonel reefed his aircraft into a hard right turn away from the launcher, wondering where the rest of the missile battery's vehicles were. Shade 2 skimmed over the target. The pilot toggled off his 4 bombs and kept heading west. Gunfire rippled across the sky in his wake. Too late. The French-made Durandal weapons fell off the ejector racks and scattered. Once free, they pointed down, and rockets fired to accelerate the munitions straight at the ground. They were designed to break up concrete runways and were ideal for underground fuel tanks. The bombs did not explode on impact. Instead, the hard steel weapons lanced into the ground, penetrating several feet before detonating. 3 found underground fuel tanks. The Durandals exploded upward, breaking open a path for burning fuel to leap into the air. It was the next thing to a nuclear detonation. 3 white columns of flame rocketed into the air, spreading like fountains and dropping fuel for hundreds of yards. Every vehicle in the compound was engulfed in flame, and only those men near the perimeter escaped with their lives. Rubber fuel bladders brought to the site exploded a few seconds later, and a river of burning diesel and gasoline spread through the trees. In a matter of seconds, 20 acres of woods were transformed into a fireball that raced skyward, punctuated by secondary explosions. Ellington's fighter rocked violently as the shockwave passed. Damn, he said quietly. The plan called for him to use his cluster munitions to ignite what the Durandals had burst open. Don't think the Rockeyes are necessary, Duke, Isley observed. Ellington tried to blink away the dots as he turned away, keeping as low as he could. He found himself flying right down a road. The Soviet commander-in-chief of the Western Theater was already angry, and what he saw to the east didn't help. He just conferred with the commander of the 3rd Shock Army at Zarentin to learn that the attack had again bogged down within sight of Hamburg. Furious that his most powerful tank force had failed to achieve its objective, he'd relieved its commander on the spot and was returning to his own command post. Now he saw what could only be one of his 3 major fuel depots rising into the clear sky. The general cursed and stood, pushing aside the roof panel on his armored command vehicle. As he blinked his dazzled eyes, a black mass seemed to appear at the lower edge of the fireball. What's that? Ellington wondered. His TV display showed 4 armored vehicles in a tight column. One of them a SAM launcher. He flicked his bomb release controls to armed and dropped his 4 Rockeye canisters, then turned south. His tail-mounted strike cameras recorded what followed. The Rockeyes split open, distributing their bomblets at a shallow angle across the road. They exploded on impact. Sink West died a soldier's death. His last act was to seize a machine gun and fire at the aircraft. 4 bomblets fell within a few meters of his vehicle. Their fragments sliced through the light armor, killing everyone inside even before its fuel tank exploded, adding another fireball to a sky that had still not returned to darkness. Stendal, German Democratic Republic. The flight in was bad enough. They'd come in aboard a light bomber racing in at low level to a military airport east of Berlin. No more than 4 staff members to an aircraft. All had arrived safely, but Alexeyev wondered how much of it was skill and how much luck. This airfield had clearly been visited by NATO aircraft recently, and the general already had his doubts about what his colleagues in the Air Force had told him about their ability to control the sky even in daylight. From Berlin, a helicopter took his party to Sync West's forward command post outside Stendal. Alexeyev was the first senior officer to arrive at the underground bunker complex, and he did not like what he found. The staff officers present were too concerned with what the NATO forces were doing, and not concerned enough with what the Red Army was supposed to be doing to them. The initiative had not been lost, but his first impression was that the danger was real. Alexeyev located the command operations officer and started assembling information on how the campaign was going. His commander arrived half an hour later, and immediately took Alexeyev into his office. "Well, Pasha? I have to see the front at once. We have 3 attacks underway. I need to see how they are going. The German counterattack at Hamburg was repulsed, again, but this time we lack the forces to exploit it. The northern area is currently in stalemate. Our deepest penetration to date is just over 100 kilometers. The timetable has gone completely to hell. Losses are far higher than expected, on both sides, but worse for us. We have gravely underestimated the lethality of NATO anti-tank weapons. Our artillery has been unable to suppress them enough for our forces to achieve a major breakthrough. NATO air power is hurting us badly, especially at night. Reinforcements are not getting forward as well as we expected. We still have the initiative in most areas, but unless we achieve a breakthrough, that may not last more than another few days. We must find a weakness in NATO lines and launch a major coordinated attack soon." "The NATO situation?" Alexeyev shrugged. "Their forces are fully in the field. Further reinforcements are coming in from America, but from what our prisoners have told us, not so well as they expected. My impression is that they are stretched very thin in some areas, but we have not as yet identified a major area of weakness. If we can find one, and exploit it, I think we can rupture the front and stage a multi-divisional breakout. They can't be strong everywhere. The German demand for forward defense compels the NATO forces to try and stop us everywhere. We made the same mistake in 1941. It cost us heavily. It must be doing the same to them." "How soon do you wish to visit the front?" "Within the hour. I'll take Captain Sergetov with me." "The party man's son? If he's hurt, Pasha—" "He's an officer in the Soviet Army. Whatever his father might be, I need him." "Very well. Keep me posted on where you are. Send the operations people in. We have to get control of this whorehouse." Alexeyev commandeered a new Mi-24 attack helicopter for his reconnaissance. Overhead, a flight of agile MiG-21 fighters guarded the general as the helicopter skimmed low over the treetops. He eschewed the seat, instead crouching by the windows to see what he could. A lifetime of military service had not prepared him for the destruction that lay on the landscape below him. It seemed that every road held a burned-out tank or truck. The major crossroads had gotten particularly severe attention from NATO air power. Here a bridge had been knocked out, and immediately behind it a company of tanks waiting its repair had been savaged. The charred remains of aircraft, vehicles, and men had transformed the neat, picturesque German countryside into a junkyard of high-technology weapons. As they crossed the border into West Germany, things only got worse. Each road had been fought for, each tiny village. He counted 11 smashed tanks outside one such village, and wondered how many others had been pulled off the battlefield for repair. The town itself was almost totally destroyed by artillery and resulting fires. He saw only one building that looked like it might be habitable. 5 kilometers west, the same story was repeated, and Alexeyev realized that a whole regiment of tanks had been lost in a 10-kilometer advance down a single road. He began to see NATO equipment, a German attack helicopter identifiable only from the tail rotor that stuck out from the circle of ashes, a few tanks, and infantry carriers. For both sides, the proud vehicles manufactured at the greatest expense and skill were scattered on the landscape like trash thrown from a car window. The Soviets had more to expend, the general knew, but how many more? The helicopter landed at the edge of a forest. Just within the tree line, Alexeyev saw, anti-aircraft guns tracked them all the way to the ground. He and Sergetov jumped out, ducking under the still turning main rotor as they ran into the trees. There they found a cluster of command vehicles. "Welcome, Comrade General," said a dirty-faced Red Army colonel. "Where is the divisional commander?" "I'm in command. The general was killed day before yesterday by enemy artillery fire. We have to move the CP twice a day. They are becoming very skilled at locating us." "Your situation?" Alexeyev asked curtly. "The men are tired, but they can still fight. We are not getting sufficient air support, and the NATO fighters give us no rest at night. We have about half our nominal combat strength, except in artillery. That's down to a third. The Americans have just changed tactics on us. Now, instead of attacking the leading tank formations, they are sending their aircraft after our guns first. We were badly hurt last night. Just as we were launching a regimental attack, 4 of their ground attack fighters nearly wiped out a battalion of mobile guns. The attack failed." "What about concealment?" Alexeyev demanded. "Ask the devil's mother why it doesn't work," the colonel shot back. "Their radar aircraft can evidently track vehicles on the ground. We've tried jamming, we've tried lures. Sometimes it works, but sometimes not. The division command post has been attacked twice. My regiments are commanded by majors, my battalions by captains. NATO tactics are to go for the unit commanders, and the bastards are good at it. Every time we approach a village, my tanks have to fight through a swarm of missiles. We've tried rockets and artillery to suppress them, but you can't take the time to blast every building in sight. We'd never get anywhere." "What do you need?" "Air support, and lots of it. Get me the support to smash through what's opposing me, and I'll give you your damned breakout." 10 kilometers behind the front, a tank division was waiting for this very unit to rupture the front. But how could it exploit a breakthrough that was never made? "Your supply situation?" "Could be better, but we're getting enough forward to supply what we have left. Not enough to support an intact division." "What are you doing now?" "We launch a 2-regiment attack just over an hour from now. Another village named Bieben. We estimate enemy strength as 2 understrength battalions of infantry supported by tanks and artillery. The village commands a crossroads we need. Same one we tried to get last night. This assault should work. Do you wish to observe?" "Yes." "Then we'd better get you forward. Forget the helicopter unless you want to die. Besides," the colonel smiled, "I can use it to support the attack. I'll give you an infantry carrier to get you forward. It will be dangerous up there, Comrade General," the colonel warned. "Fine, you can protect us. When do we leave?"